Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers, glad you've decided to join us as well. Another interesting guest this week. He's back for a repeat appearance, Marc Nuttle.
Yes, we asked Marc to come back and do another show with us, just as he has done this last week. And we're going to be talking about the same thing we talked about last time, only we're going to be more expansive about it. Marc's quite well-traveled, well-versed, well-educated, and well-spoken, and we're going to get a little bit of all of that today.
The economy, politics, Marc's done a lot of different things, and he'll share a lot of those opinions coming up today on The Verdict.
Every day America uses clean-burning natural gas instead of coal or oil is a day of victory for our environment. That's why Chesapeake chose to explore for natural gas exclusively, and we've never looked back. Because natural gas burns twice as clean as oil or coal, and reducing carbon emissions to combat potential global warming is every bit as urgent as cutting our dependence on energy imports. As America's #1 driller of new gas wells, Chesapeake is moving fast to find untapped reserves of natural gas here at home. It's the right fuel for America's economy and the fuel for a clean air future. We just happen to be early to see it so clearly. Chesapeake, natural gas wins the day.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent's going to reintroduce last week's guest, who's back for another appearance, Marc Nuttle.
Yeah, this is not a rerun. This is a new appearance by Marc Nuttle, and we're really pleased about it. As a matter of fact, we got some indications from you for watching last week's show that you are pleased that we're having him back as well. As you remember, Marc is an attorney in Norman. He's a managing partner of Oklahoma Sovereign Developers. He has vast experience in consulting with political leaders, business leaders, governmental leaders, and governments, as a matter of fact, on financial matters, economic matters, and development matters. He's a national TV personality, been on all the major networks, including CNN. And I add this just for fun, he was in 1998 a judge in the Miss America pageant. That's not why we have him on, but I think it's a nice thing to add. Marc, welcome back.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks for having me.
The current economic situation, how is it playing out? Is a lot of the staring down that's going down in Washington, is this fruitful, and how's it going to play out?
Well, the current situation is this. It is a worldwide problem. And that's the first thing that we have to remember as the members of Congress are trying to work their way through this. But I think I will point out quickly this chart that we have about what is the problem today. If we could pull up that chart up.
Okay, now this chart, I'll talk you through it. On the left side there, you see this big spike when the Depression took place. But this is total U.S. debt. And what we're seeing now is that what you're saying is that debt has increased even where it was in 1933.
It's even higher, and this includes personal debt and corporate debt. It is at the highest it's ever been in history. And what that shows on the right-hand side is that this has to be dealt with. It has to be somehow filtered through the system before we can have a full recovery. And there's always pain when you unravel debt. But I think that chart sums it up. And then we can go into the average American doesn't have the ability right now to deal with an economic downturn is my point. The average household debt today is 120% of assets on the individual, and therefore one of the problems Congress is facing. So it's a bad situation. Second, I just finished, I sit on an international board of advisors called NOAA, and they're international fund managers. They predicted in September of 2007 that the Dow would be 9,000 in the United States in September. It's partly the data I used in writing the book. And they're now saying that this isn't doomsday. We can work through this, but we've got to make the right decisions on a world basis or it'll be prolonged. And right now it looks to them like at least the first quarter of 2010. So that's what we're dealing with. Now, as far as the auto industry and the problems that are going on in Washington, D.C. today, I have sympathy for the members who are trying to figure out what to do. Remember, we are in a transitional world economy, trying to figure out how to let a democratic capitalistic system restructure itself. That's what has to happen. The government can't do it for us, but it can provide a safety net and some cushion for people, which we have to do to help them through this transition. Now, for instance, like in the car bailout, $34 billion for the three car manufacturers in the United States is about 9 months cash flow. It's not enough. It won't turn things around. And so basically what they're talking about doing now is a $15 billion stopgap measure until President-elect Obama can take office and decide what he wants to do. But see, it's more of a problem than just that. There's a supply chain in the United States that supplies parts, even axles and some heavy manufactured parts to these car manufacturers. And they also supply to foreign manufacturers in the United States that are producing cars that people want and they're solvent. If those supply chains go under, it will impact even the foreign manufacturers in the United States. Would make them withdraw back to their own supply chains and could cause a 2 to 5 year disruption. And that's probably an estimate of another 12 million jobs on the line. What has to be remembered is that we have to remember that we're trying to restructure a system that still allows for the freedom of choice, and the government shouldn't be in the business of picking winners and losers, but allowing the system to restructure itself in a way that people can get through this with the least amount of pain.
Well, doesn't it seem like they are picking winners and losers, though?
Well, I'm worried about that, and I'm worried that it's going to go that way, yes. And as we talked about in the last show, the difference between the United States and most of the rest of the world is that we're free to go into business without government permission, make these choices for ourselves and our families, what we want to do. If the government starts to pick winners and choosers, you take that freedom away, and now you have to deal with the government as a competitor. It doesn't work, and it won't work, and it won't work for us.
When you think back, though, the standard of living where it was in the 1930s, because people are saying, if you're saying that the debt's worse than the Great Depression, people are saying this is going to be like the Depression. The standard of living has changed so much. I mean, the poorest people in 2008 are significantly in a different position than the poorest people were in 1933.
Absolutely. And first, there are several things that are different than 1929 and 1930. We didn't have the government regulatory authority then that we have now. We didn't have the support system for Social Security and other things that came out of the Great Depression. It's not, and we were much more rural and less urban then, and we're more concentrated now in a world economy. Those things are all different. But to your point, Mick, in the United States today, the average person on welfare has 2 TVs and more square space to live in than the average middle-class person in Europe. Now think about that a minute. So our wealth is there, our ability to survive this is there if we'll make the right decision. But yes, your point's correct.
What about, Mark, it seems to me that much of the publicity about what's going on in Washington about helping big business has been focused on the automobile industry and the proposed bailout. What about small business? And what about the oil and gas industry? Are they in dire straits? Are they hurting as well? And is there any talk about any assistance there?
Well, let's take that in reverse order. First,
Okay.
in the oil and gas industry, no, there's no assistance. They're, as we discussed in the last show, they're talking about windfalls profits tax and capping their profits. And that would be the worst thing you could do to them. They're not asking for help. Just leave us alone. We know, just tell us the rules on a worldwide basis and we'll compete, explore, and produce oil and gas. And that's mainly what they want to do, and we should allow them to do that. Now, how does that impact Oklahoma? Well, let's just jump to that question. As we discussed again in the last show, Oklahoma is a small business state. 65% of our revenue for state government, but also our economy comes from small businesses of 25 employees or less. In a managed economy, again, big business, big government, big labor, working in concert as a tri-partnership to produce pension funds and set fees for wages and workplace environment, is all well and good, but it has to be limited to not impose upon small business, because they don't have the size to be able to provide those benefits. They can't fund the unfunded mandates themselves, and that would be disastrous for Oklahoma. And second, we're still largely a commodity-driven economy, oil and gas and agriculture. It's very important to us. It's important to the state for government. It's important to jobs. It's important to who we are culturally. The talk isn't about helping oil and gas. The talk is about penalizing them. And that would be, again, disastrous for Oklahoma and how it would impact us directly.
Here's one thing I don't understand. If one of the problems is debt, how can we resolve it with this green light in Washington about we got to spend? In other words, we're going to spend more money to get us out of this problem that's created by debt. What am I missing here?
Well, you're not missing anything. It's scary. We're off the charts on what the deficit's going to be for both 08 and 09 fiscal year. It's at least $1 trillion deficit, and probably more like 1.5 to 2 trillion. We've never had deficits like that, even as a percent of the GDP, gross national product. It is a struggle, Mick, in that if you just let it go and everybody goes into bankruptcy, what would the result be to the average person? And it would be very, very, very serious. And so we have to keep that in mind. And that is one of the points I want to make on the show today. We need international help. It has to be an international solution. Why did Secretary Paulson go to China last week? Why even go to China in the mix of all this? Well, because it's critical. There are only 2 areas of the world that have accumulation of capital. One is the Middle East, has about $9 trillion right now, just from oil and gas revenues. The other is China, has about $2 trillion. But in the Middle East, there is no economic consensus on what to do with the money. It's a very fractured world over there, and they all take care of themselves, still tribal in nature. Now, they can get together at OPEC and decide what to charge for their main asset, but they do not have a world economic policy. China, on the other hand, does. There's a central control and authority there on what to do with that $2 trillion. That's why it's over there. China has a problem different than ours. About 10% of their population are migrant, have never been able to settle into that new system. Rural areas that are depressed, trying to find work in the urban areas, and they can't place them. There's 100 million people in China living off the land just like gypsies in the Middle Ages, not Middle Ages, well, yeah, Middle Ages, the middle centuries. And that number is getting ready to go maybe up to 120, and they're worried that if China doesn't maintain a growth rate of 8%, it could go to 200 million, and could actually break their system for what they're available to supply through government for services. Now,
but let me jump in and get us to a break if I can. We're a little bit past time. Marc Nuttle, our guest, will pick it right where we left off when we return on The Verdict.
I'm Beulah Shavney, and I'm an original member of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, and I'm Chickasaw. I worked at the Phoenix Indian Hospital for a year, and then there was the war. I felt like it was my duty I wanted in the Army, so I made it, got in, and it was a good feeling to put that uniform on. We were one of a kind that started something and finished it. To see these women go in today, they are really doing a great job. And I'm very proud to look back now and see that I was one of the first ones of the Army that went in. There is just something that stands out about Chickasaw women. They want to go as far as they can go and succeed. I've got to do my best because I'm Chickasaw.
Home values are down in some states, but not in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's home values have increased 4.2% during the past 12 months. Unlike some states where home values have decreased as much as 20%. Good thing you're in Oklahoma. There may be real estate problems in some states, but there has never been a better time than now to buy or sell a home in Oklahoma. One of the most affordable states in the country, Oklahomans are buying and selling homes every day, and an Oklahoma Realtor can show you how. Good thing you're in Oklahoma.
Okiwani is an Indian name for a place where children play. When we obtained the camp, we found a lot of oil debris left in the woods. We saw a commercial about how the oil and natural gas industry cleans up old oil well sites. We called the OERB and they agreed to remove tons of concrete and steel. Didn't cost us a thing. Thousands of children have left their footprints on this land. Thanks to the oil and gas industry, they will for a long time to come.
We're visiting with Marc Nuttle. You were discussing China's role in perhaps a long-term solution to our economic problems.
Well, I think where we left off is that China has a migrant problem and how to actually provide services to the rural areas. And if they don't maintain, the New York Times has written extensively on this, and I agree with it, that if they don't maintain a growth of 8%, there could be civil disorder in their country. Now, why do they care about the United States? Well, remember, the United States consumes 50% of all goods and services of the world's GDP. Europe, 30, so between just the G7, excluding Russia, the United States and Europe consumes 80%. China now produces 5%, we produce 30%, but 80% of that goes into the United States and Europe. And so there's a partnership there that they understand that if we can't buy their goods, they're in trouble. And there's no place else to sell it. So they're interested, and they're trying to figure this capitalistic world out. You know, they're communist. Their system isn't as fluid as ours, as flexible, and certainly not transparent. So they're going through that, and we're trying to help them with that. But they're the only concentration of capital in the world. Beyond, we have an ability to borrow. The United States can still deficit spend, and people will buy our T-bills because they trust full faith and effect of the United States. But China has to live out of cash flow. They can't sell T-bills like we can. And so there's this partnership developing. We're trying to figure out how to do that on a worldwide basis. Because without it, if we both don't make it, the pressure from one to the other could topple one or the other.
So our biggest source of outside capital is China.
Yes.
And that's why Paulson was there probably.
Yes.
Not on vacation.
No.
The national press, we're watching the way that they're dealing it. Are they fueling the right messages?
Well, where I think the void is on the international component. I know it's complicated, but Fareed Zakaria, who is the Newsweek editor, international editor, spoke at OU at a David Bourne Associates dinner once, and still his words resonate in my ears, that if the United States doesn't, the population of the United States doesn't begin to understand that we're in a world community and how to deal with it, he feared for our country, and I do too. We do not control oil prices anymore. We don't control food prices. We don't necessarily control exchange rates, world banking and financing. And that hasn't been portrayed. I did bring an article from the Wall Street Journal. The two publications, in my opinion, that if you want to read something that gives you a balanced view, is The Economist magazine, which is out of Great Britain, and the Wall Street Journal. It talks about, in a world concept and matrix, how these things have to be played out. In Friday's, Andy Stern, who is a major labor leader, basically called for a European economic model for the United States.
Well, a real brief summary, describe to our viewers what that would be.
It's a managed economy, central government, big business, big labor working in concert for the management of the people's resources. You basically have your government as a full partner. Whether you believe in that or not, the bottom line is small business can't survive in that environment. The oil and gas industry can't survive in that environment because of the taxes they'd have to pay. And it would certainly not, it would destroy the U.S. model of what's been so successful for us since 1776. It would be particularly disastrous for Oklahoma.
Well, of the things that are going on in Washington now, what are the things Oklahomans ought to be paying most attention to and be thinking about? Well,
understanding the equation, understanding how to support their elected officials, and in themselves taking the necessary steps that they have to for savings and preparing for what could be a tough year next year. I mean, some of the issues that are on the table that seem palatable until you look at them. One is this Gordon Brown statement at the Economic Summit called by President Sarkozy of France.
Now, Gordon Brown being the Prime Minister
of Great Britain. I'm sorry, thank
yeah.
you. And that it was critical that we have this meeting before the elections, and President Bush accommodated them, saying nothing would be done until the elections were finished, which now have been. But he proposed in writing a one world banking system with a one world audit system. And the idea being that, as we have in the United States today, there's a Federal Reserve and a federal government that audits the banks. The FDIC is the insurance agency that insures deposits. In this case, the International Monetary Fund would be restructured to be the FDIC of the world. And you'd all be member banks of that, with somebody probably in Belgium and in a World Trade Organization monitoring our banks. That is a European system. Now you have to understand when you make the decision for yourself and your family's future, what to do about that, how to support elected officials to avoid that. I'm giving myself away. I don't want a European system for America. I want small business and family businesses to be able to survive. And if Oklahoma is going to have a chance in a world economy, we have to have that freedom, and we have to work for it.
How does labor come out at the end of the day? I think most people agree that labor issues are what has caused the big three automakers to have their problems, their long-term issues. But if you go to a European model where the unions are even stronger than they are now, if that was part of the problem, how do we solve it by having unions even play a larger role in the economy?
Well, we don't. And if you believe Andy Stern, then we need a European model, and it's just basically everybody shares the wealth. Listen, there's nothing wrong with unions. There was a time when we needed unions, and unions have a role today. But it needs to be within limits of freedom and making sure that businesses, particularly small and family businesses, are able to operate in a system where they can start a business and grow to the point that they're large enough to be able to have this critical mass to support a big business, big labor, big government agenda. It's worked for us just fine to this point. But the reason I pause there, Mick, is that this is a transitional problem. This isn't like the '74 recession or the '81 or the '92 recession. This is a world problem that has finally hit a wall. It must be worked out. This is a transitional time in our life that we'll look back on this 25 years from now and say that's when it happened and here was the result. And I have sympathy for people who are losing their jobs and put their life into these big businesses, and particularly retired, and their pension funds are at risk. And we have to do something to help. But it's in a transition. That's the answer to the question. And unions have to understand. This is what I don't think that Mr. Stern understands. It's not going to be like it was ever again. And that's the change that we have to understand together and move to a new economic model in which we can compete.
We've seen in the press just in recent days President-elect Obama's plan for basically a WPA, or at least a public works, creating 2 to 3 million jobs, depending on what you read. How does that play into the equation, both nationally and locally?
Well, it is a government spending project that has some merit.
But how do you get an auto worker to start building roads?
Well, he just has to go do it.
He has to learn how to do it and do it. So there's a transition phase of that before things.
But the important thing is not to pick industries and support them so that they survive when they shouldn't. But WPA programs, possibly.
We've got about a minute left, and I'm just going to let you go. What should our audience know about where we are here ending up 2008?
Yeah, what is our moment of truth, to put it in the vernacular of the title of the book?
Well, where we are today is we are a great country with great resources, great infrastructure, and a wonderful middle class that means to do the right thing. We're going to have to pull through this together. We're going to have to get to a point where we're not divisional and confrontational. It's going to take all of us working together in this moment of truth.
And it seems like there's the talk at the beginning of that in Washington now. I mean, there seems to be more people on board to acknowledge there's a problem and try to work through it than there has been. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Marc Nuttle is our guest today on The Verdict. Always a wealth of information. Marc, thanks again for coming on.
Marc.
Thank you.
Kent and I'll have a final word right after this.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Welcome back to The Verdict. We are wrapping up a show in which Marc Nuttle came back to visit us and had a lot of interesting things to say.
Well, indeed, made the difficult concepts somewhat simpler to understand. At least he was explaining them in a very simple and understandable fashion. And we appreciate Marc doing 2 shows with us. That's a great devotion of time for which we're grateful.
And hope he can come back again someday. I want to give you our website information. Go to this website. Tell us about a guest you'd like to see on an upcoming edition of The Verdict. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next week, right here on The Verdict.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.